December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. It started with a mother's voice on the phone.
911 emergency. Police, what's on the 5515th Street? What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please, find.
It was Patsy Ramsey, panicked, reporting a kidnapping. Her 6-year-old daughter JonBenet was gone. A ransom note left behind, demanding money, urging silence, threatening death. But then, everything changed. JonBenet wasn't missing. She was found. In the basement. Already gone. And just like that, this was no longer a kidnapping. It was a homicide. And suspicion turned inward, onto the very people who called for help. The parents. The brother. The perfect family portrait suddenly cracked. No signs of forced entry. No footsteps in the snow. And no one else seen going in or out. So, if there was no stranger who was left, what happened that night? What evil desire drove an innocent child, a promised star, into death? This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. Meet the Ramseys. From the outside, they were the American dream. The Ramseys lived at 755 15th Street, Boulder, Colorado in a grand, stone-faced mansion. Nearly 7,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a winding staircase. It was the kind of house people pointed at and whispered, "Must be nice." In their community, the Ramseys were more than well known. They were admired, wealthy, charitable, church-going. A family of high standards and even higher appearances. John, the business mogul. Patsy, the former beauty queen. JonBenet, the child star. Burke, the quiet son. They looked perfect. But not everything polished is gold. JonBenét Ramsey was the picture of quiet success. Born in 1943, a former Navy man, a graduate of the University of Michigan. By 1996, he was CEO of Access Graphics, a booming computer distribution company with over $1 billion in revenue. His Christmas bonus that year, $118,000, an unbelievable everyone at that time. John was private, calculated, calm. He had 3 children from a previous marriage, John Andrew, Melinda, and Beth, who had died in a car crash in 1992. But by 1996, he had built a new life with Patsy and 2 younger children, Burke and JonBenet. John wasn't flashy. He avoided the spotlight. But everything about him, from his career to his home, spoke of control, achievement, and prestige. If John was the brain, Patsy was the light. A former Miss West Virginia since 1977, Patsy brought energy, elegance, and showmanship to the Ramsey household. She was deeply involved in the social life of Boulder's elite, a Southern belle with a polished voice and a passion for pageants. But beneath the charm, many described her as meticulous, image-conscious, and controlling. She was the one who entered JonBenet into child beauty pageants, selecting her outfits, choreographing her routines, and styling her like a miniature queen. However, they criticized that she turned her child into a performance, a symbol of perfection, and possibly a vessel of her own unresolved ambition. But perhaps what stood out most in the aftermath of the tragedy was this. Patsy was the one who called 911 that morning. And some experts believe she might also have been the one who wrote the ransom note. The youngest in the Ramsey family was JonBenét Ramsey, 6 years old. She wasn't just beautiful. She was radiant, poised. Her smile could stop strangers in the grocery store. Her name was a combination of JonBenet and Patricia, a brand from birth. And by 4 years old, she was already competing in national beauty pageants. Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Sunburst, National Tiny Miss Beauty. She won crowns. She danced, sang, and waved like royalty. Audiences adored her. Judges adored her. Her mother adored her. But critics didn't. They said she was dressed too grown up, painted too heavily, smiling too hard. Like a doll, not a child. Burke Ramsey was JonBenet's older brother. 9 years old at the time. Smart, shy, obsessed with video games and gadgets. He was the quieter child, the one no one paid much attention to. In family photos, he was there, but rarely centered. In media coverage, barely mentioned. He became the forgotten child in many ways. Just weeks before the murder, a business magazine profiled the Ramseys, praising their wealth, charm, and achievements. They were the kind of family people envied, not questioned. But behind closed doors, there were cracks. What really happened to JonBenét Ramsey? It was Christmas night, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family had spent the evening at a holiday party, hosted by their close friends, Fleet and Priscilla White, a gathering filled with carols, champagne, and warmth. By all accounts, it was a quiet, uneventful evening. Around 8:00 to 9:00 p.m., John, Patsy, and their two children, JonBenet and Burke, left the party and returned home. According to Patsy, JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car. She said they carried her inside and tucked her into bed. Burke, too, was said to have gone straight to his room and fell asleep without a word. No lights turned on. No arguments. No signs of anything out of place. On the morning of December 26th, between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., Patsy Ramsey said she woke up early to start the family's planned trip to Michigan. As she descended the back staircase toward the kitchen, she noticed something strange, a piece of paper sitting on one of the wooden steps. It wasn't just a note. It was a handwritten ransom letter, nearly 3 pages long. The message was bizarre. It claimed to be from small foreign faction. It demanded $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. It warned them not to call the police and threatened that, if they didn't follow instructions, their daughter would be beheaded. It ended with a chilling and confusing sign, off, victory, SBTC. No one figured out what that meant. Just minutes later, Patsy Ramsey called 911. Her voice on the recording was frantic, nearly unintelligible through sobs.
911 emergency. Police, apartment by 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We were kidnapped. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left in our daughter's gun. A note was left in your daughter's gun? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just held the note. And my daughter's is it the same who took her? What? Is it the same who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the rubber. Oh my God. Please. Okay, I'm sending an officer over, okay? Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please. Okay, calm. Is somebody? I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath, please. Okay? Hurry. Patsy.
By 6:00 a.m., the Boulder Police Department had officers at the Ramsey residence. They came expecting to investigate a kidnapping. What they found, though, was confusion. The house was full of people, not just John, Patsy, and Burke, but also friends, neighbors, and even a minister, all of whom had been called shortly after Patsy's discovery. They were roaming freely through rooms, comforting the family, unknowingly contaminating what may have been a crime scene. Yet for the police, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no pried doors. Nothing out of place, at least, not at first glance. They were told to wait for further instructions. Perhaps the kidnapper would call. Perhaps they'd attempt contact. The FBI was notified. A plan was forming. But something didn't feel right. While the police focused on the kidnapping theory, John Ramsey couldn't stay still. Officers later said he seemed unsettled, moving between rooms, whispering to friends, making phone calls, even receiving faxes from his office. And one thing stood out. The ransom note had specifically said not to call the police. But they did. And it said to wait for a phone from the kidnappers by 8:00 a.m. No such call ever came. By mid-morning, the Ramsey home had become a mix of grief, speculation, and confusion. The police were still trying to treat this as a kidnapping. But with each passing hour, that story made less and less sense. Then came a suggestion. One of the detectives, seeing the growing tension and lack of progress, asked John to do one more search. Check the house again, anywhere someone could be hiding. John agreed. He walked away with Fleet White, the family friend, downstairs, toward the basement. What happened next would change everything. Until that basement door opened, this was still a kidnapping case. Still a mystery with hope. Still a family clinging to the possibility of rescue. But what came after shattered that hope. At around 100 p.m. on December 26, 1996, John Ramsey, along with family friend Fleet White, went into the basement of their home after a detective suggested searching the house again. Behind a previously unchecked door, John found the body of his daughter, JonBenet. She was lying on her back on the floor, dressed in a white nightgown with her underwear pulled out of place. Her mouth was covered with duct tape, her wrists bound with nylon cord, and a garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush and cord was tied tightly around her neck. Strikingly, a piece of fabric from Patsy Ramsey's clothing was found on the murder weapon. The handle of the garrote was confirmed to be made from Patsy's paintbrush. However, one half of the paintbrush handle was never recovered, raising suspicions that someone may have intentionally removed it from the scene. Additionally, JonBenet had an unidentified white substance present in her vaginal area, possibly lotion, cream, or cleanser, indicating a potential attempt to erase forensic evidence. Her body was found beside a suitcase placed under the basement window, which contained a small shard of glass. This suitcase may have been used to stage a point of entry or facilitate movement within the basement. No family member claimed responsibility for placing it there. John later revealed that police discovered a side door open that morning, a rarely used entrance the family did not realize had been unlatched. Instead of waiting for crime scene investigators, John carried JonBenet's body upstairs, laid her near the Christmas tree, removed the tape and bindings, and covered her with a blanket. From an investigative standpoint, this action irreversibly compromised the integrity of the crime scene. Initial forensic findings estimated the time of death between late night on December 25 and early morning on December 26. The cause of death was strangulation by garrote and a severe blow to the head, evidenced by an 8.5-inch skull fracture. Bruises on her back, legs, and shoulders suggested dragging or physical struggle. There were signs of sexual assault. A drop of blood found in her underwear contained DNA that did not match anyone in the family. One small detail stood out: a bowl of pineapple with milk was found on the kitchen table. JonBenet had undigested pineapple in her stomach. Burke's fingerprints were on the bowl, but he claimed no memory of eating it. Patsy denied serving it altogether. A small basement window was found partially open. A suitcase was positioned beneath it, possibly to assist entry or exit. However, spider webs were intact, and there was no disturbance in dust or any footprints in the snow outside. Only one unknown DNA sample was found in JonBenet's underwear and under her fingernails. A long hair found on her hand also did not match any family members. The ransom note was written on Patsy's stationery using a pen from her kitchen. A draft note was discovered in the trash. No foreign fingerprints were found, only those of the Ramseys. The scene was mishandled from the beginning. Friends and neighbors were allowed to walk freely throughout the house, contaminating evidence. The basement was not thoroughly searched at first. Burke was sent to a friend's house before any formal interview. A police officer posted at the front door failed to document everyone entering or leaving. Patsy was reportedly more concerned with media perception than with finding her daughter. John contacted lawyers and PR experts within hours of the body's discovery. These actions raised suspicions they were preparing for scrutiny rather than mourning. Meanwhile, an officer leaked the full content of the ransom note to the press, causing public chaos and compromising the confidentiality of the evidence. This violation of proper investigative protocol created further obstacles for the investigation. Several red flags were missed. The sexual trauma included both fresh injuries and older, healing tissue, suggesting prior abuse. No evidence of struggle or screams. JonBenet may have been drugged, but toxicology testing was limited. A grayish residue on one of JonBenet's socks didn't match the basement environment, suggesting she may have been moved. The basement window setup made no physical sense as an entry point. Officer Rick French had looked at the basement door earlier, but failed to open it, believing it was just storage. Neither John nor Patsy asked where JonBenet was in their initial statements. A psychological anomaly. A man seen on a supermarket surveillance camera near the Ramsey home that night was never identified or pursued. Evidence was stored improperly, causing potential DNA contamination that hindered future testing. All of this painted a picture, not just of tragedy, but of chaos, of leads not followed, and errors that may have cost the truth. The crime scene, in the end, was not just where JonBenet died, it was where justice stumbled. Theories and suspects. Who could have done this? From the earliest moments of the investigation, Boulder police focused intensely on two competing theories: that the killer came from inside the house, or from the outside. Over time, both directions yielded troubling clues, but neither offered certainty. Let's begin with the direction that detectives pursued most aggressively. The most immediate suspicion fell on the family. Police found it difficult to accept that a stranger could have entered the Ramsey home, committed such a calculated act of violence, and left without leaving behind any trace. The theory that the kidnapping was staged quickly emerged. The ransom note, written with Patsy's notepad and pen, was nearly 3 handwritten pages long, an anomaly in actual abduction cases. The note's request for a $118,000 in ransom, precisely matching John Ramsey's bonus that year, suggested knowledge only an insider would possess. Adding to police suspicion was the total lack of evidence pointing to a break-in. The basement window had undisturbed spider webs, and a suitcase below it with no signs of use. No footprints in the fresh snow outside the home. Even more strangely, the family claimed they were unaware the side door was opened. These details collectively eroded the possibility of an outside intruder. The Ramseys' behavior also drew scrutiny. They refused to take polygraph tests requested by investigators, further deepening suspicion and casting doubt on their willingness to cooperate fully with the authorities. They delayed police interviews for weeks and engaged lawyers and public relations consultants almost immediately after the discovery of JonBenet's body. Even in the frantic 911 call, neither John nor Patsy asked, "Where is JonBenet?" A detail behavioral experts flagged as psychologically inconsistent with genuine parental panic. The disturbing signs of sexual trauma, including both fresh and older injuries, as well as a strange white substance in her vaginal area, possibly lotion or some chemical cleanser, may point to potential ongoing abuse, possibly from someone within the household. On top of that, no neighbors heard screams or disturbances on the night of the crime. JonBenet had no defensive wounds, leading to theories that she may have been sedated. Unfortunately, toxicology tests were incomplete, leaving this line of inquiry unresolved. While police leaned toward the theory of an inside job, the idea of an external intruder was not entirely dismissed. Supporting this were pieces of found DNA that did not match anyone in the family. A small basement window was open, and a suitcase was positioned beneath it, although its condition did not support active use. Security footage from a nearby store showed a man loitering around the Ramsey home that night, but this lead was never pursued with vigor. Still, the theory had significant weaknesses. No footprints or fibers supported a break-in. The house was undisturbed. The ransom note, so elaborate and specific, made little sense if JonBenet had already been killed. No further communication was made to claim the ransom. One of the most baffling elements of the case remained the ransom note. Its unprecedented length alone raised suspicion. FBI experts noted that real ransom notes are short, direct, and businesslike, not emotional monologues. That it was written using the family's own paper and pen, with a discarded draft found in the trash, indicated the writer took time inside the home, something unlikely for an intruder. The language in the note was theatrical, referencing lines from films like Speed and Ransom. Its sign-off, Victory, SBTC, was cryptic, with no clear meaning or known group behind it. Patsy's immediate 911 call, in direct defiance of the note's warning, and the lack of consequences from the so-called kidnappers all signaled the note was part of a staged narrative. Handwriting and forensic experts overwhelmingly agreed the note was not written by a stranger. It contained too many insider details, employed cinematic language, and failed to produce the outcome a real ransom note would pursue. In the end, while both theories had gaps and complications, the behavior of the Ramsey family, inconsistencies in their statements, and the manufactured elements of the crime scene compelled police to believe the killer came from within. Yet without definitive evidence, the case lingered, suspended between suspicion and silence. John Ramsey. Obviously, most of the evidence drove the investigation to the Ramsey family member. So, if this direction's true, who was the killer? Let's take a look at the least popular, but still persistent theory, that the killer may have been John Ramsey, JonBenet's father. This theory begins with one striking detail, that John was the person who discovered his daughter's body. Around 1:00 p.m. on December 26, John, along with family friend Fleet White, went into the basement, specifically to a small utility room that police had already passed over. Without hesitation, John went directly to the door, opened it, and found JonBenet lying on the floor. To many investigators, his actions seemed rehearsed, as if he already knew where her body was hidden. What followed raised even more questions. Instead of waiting for forensic investigators, John picked up his daughter's body, carried her upstairs, removed the duct tape from her mouth and the bindings from her wrists, then gently laid her down near the Christmas tree and covered her with a blanket. In doing so, he effectively destroyed key crime scene evidence, from blood patterns to fiber placement and body positioning. Adding to the suspicion was the ransom note, which demanded exactly, $118,000, the same amount as John's Christmas bonus. That oddly specific figure suggested the writer had intimate knowledge of the family's finances, something highly unlikely for a random intruder. There were other unsettling behaviors, too. In the hours immediately following the discovery of JonBenet's body, John appeared strangely calm. Instead of reacting with visible grief or shock, he quickly made calls to attorneys, family friends, and even hired public relations specialists. While some chalked it up to shock, others saw it as calculated damage control. There's also the fact that John refused to cooperate with police interviews for weeks after the crime. He didn't submit to a polygraph test until much later, and only under the supervision of a team deemed friendly to the family. This reluctance fueled suspicion that he had something to hide. Some theorists have gone even further, suggesting that John might not have committed the murder himself, but instead orchestrated the cover-up. They believe he may have directed Patsy to write the ransom note, and taken the lead in staging the scene to make it appear as a kidnapping gone wrong. In this version of events, John becomes the mastermind, the person coordinating the narrative, managing the media, and shielding the family from scrutiny. There were also questions about John's actions after the murder. He never expressed strong public grief. When Patsy passed away in 2006, John remained mostly silent, rarely speaking about JonBenet's case again. In interviews, he emphasized how the family had been victimized by the justice system and the press, but showed little emotional reflection on the loss of his daughter. Some aspects of his personal life added to the unease. John had lost another daughter, Beth, in a car accident years earlier. And while there's no known history of violence or abuse, some former colleagues and reports mention professional tension and pressure inside Access Graphics, the billion-dollar company John led at the time of the murder. The timing of the murder, coinciding with the company's peak publicity, led some to speculate that preserving his image and career may have become a driving force in how the aftermath was handled. Still, the theory that John Ramsey was the killer remains the least supported by physical evidence. No DNA matching was found on JonBenet. There's no smoking gun. But his behavior, control over the narrative, and suspicious choices in those first critical hours after the murder continue to fuel doubt. While not as widely accepted as other theories, The idea that John played a central, if not directly violent, role in the crime remains an uncomfortable possibility. And like every theory in this case, it exists in a space where suspicion lingers, but resolution never fully comes. Patsy Ramsey. Patsy Ramsey also was a prime suspect in this case. To understand the theory that Patsy Ramsey may have been responsible for her daughter JonBenet's death, one must examine the layered profile of a woman shaped by pressure, control, and image. A former beauty queen crowned Miss West Virginia in 1977, Patsy was raised in a culture that valued perfection, appearances, and public recognition. That mindset followed her into motherhood. JonBenet was not just her daughter, but a mirror of her younger self. From the age of 4, the little girl was entered into child beauty pageants, dressed elaborately, taught to smile and perform with an unnerving level of maturity. Friends described Patsy as deeply controlling and easily agitated when things didn't go to plan. This image of control was likely tested to its limits by the time of the murder. Patsy was in recovery from ovarian cancer, a battle that would have shaken her physical and emotional stability. The home environment was reportedly tense, and according to some investigators, any small misbehavior, like bedwetting or defiance, could have triggered a disproportionate response. One theory suggests that on Christmas night, something JonBenet did, perhaps wetting the bed, pushed Patsy over the edge. In a moment of rage, she may have struck JonBenet in the head, causing the 8.5-inch fracture. Realizing the gravity of the injury, she could have panicked and called John for help. From that point, the theory argues, a cover-up began. The garrote used in the strangulation was crafted from a broken paintbrush, identified as belonging to Patsy, and nylon cord. Curiously, one half of the paintbrush was never found, implying an attempt to hide or destroy incriminating evidence. A piece of Patsy's clothing was also found on the murder weapon. Patsy allegedly wrote the ransom note using her own notepad and pen, and even a discarded draft was discovered in the home's trash. The note's tone, emotional language, and theatrical references to movies like Speed and Ransom led FBI profilers to believe it had a distinctly feminine voice, not typical of criminal ransom demands. Her behavior also raised suspicion. Patsy was the one who found the ransom letter early in the morning, a 3-page note curiously placed on the stairs. In the 911 call, she sounded overly dramatic rather than confused or panicked. Analysts noted that she never once asked, "Where is JonBenet?" Nor did John. After she thought the call had ended, the line recorded a whispered conversation, possibly including the words, "What did you do? Help me, Jesus." Medical examiners found evidence of both fresh and healing trauma to JonBenet's genital area. While no semen was detected, the strange white substance looked like lotion or cleaning fluid, implying someone may have tried to clean the body post-mortem. This aligns with the theory that Patsy, perhaps horrified at what happened, attempted to erase signs of abuse. Further disturbing details included JonBenet wearing oversized underwear that had been purchased for her cousin. Investigators suspected the swap was an attempt to mask stains or trauma on her actual clothing. The fastidious nature of these changes matched Patsy's known obsession with appearances. Like John, her resistance to taking a polygraph test early in the investigation only fueled public suspicion. In later interviews, Patsy's language was sometimes evasive. On one occasion, she misspoke and said, "When we wrote the note," before correcting herself. Her emphasis on media presence, makeup, and messaging in the days following the crime seemed out of place to many. Not once did she admit wrongdoing, maintaining her innocence until her death in 2006. Despite the circumstantial weight of these details, the case against Patsy was never legally substantiated. No DNA evidence tied her directly to the crime. Handwriting experts could not definitively link her to the ransom letter. But to many investigators and the public, the pattern of control, the inconsistencies in behavior, and the carefully constructed narrative point to a deeply disturbed possibility that JonBenet's death began as a moment of rage and ended in a desperate cover-up. Burke Ramsey. Among the various theories surrounding the tragic death of JonBenét Ramsey, one of the most controversial and emotionally charged is the hypothesis that her older brother, Burke Ramsey, was responsible. While this theory remains speculative and highly contested, it continues to draw attention due to several puzzling clues and behaviors. This theory proposes that Burke, then 9 years old, may have unintentionally killed JonBenet during a moment of anger, possibly triggered by a minor sibling dispute. Faced with a devastating outcome, their parents John and Patsy Ramsey, in a desperate attempt to protect their only remaining child, allegedly staged the crime scene to resemble a kidnapping and murder. One of the most cited pieces of evidence supporting this theory is the bowl of pineapple found on the kitchen table. JonBenet's autopsy revealed undigested pineapple in her stomach, suggesting she had eaten it shortly before death. Burke's fingerprints were found on the bowl, but both parents denied serving the snack, and Burke claimed he didn't remember eating it. This inconsistency led to suspicions that a late-night dispute over the snack may have escalated into violence. JonBenet's head injury was another focal point. She suffered a massive skull fracture, believed to be caused by a blow from a blunt object. Some forensic experts argued that the injury was consistent with the shape and size of a Maglite flashlight found in the kitchen. The flashlight had no traces of blood or fingerprints, leading to speculation it had been wiped clean. Given its size and weight, it could have been wielded by a child. Another key detail was the audio recording from Patsy's 911 call. Though she believed she had hung up, the line remained open for a few seconds, capturing faint background voices. Analysis suggested the presence of Burke's voice, contradicting claims that he had slept through the entire night. Allegedly, one of the voices said, "What did you do?" Maybe Burke was asked this question at that time. Burke's behavior during interviews further fueled suspicions. In videotaped sessions with child psychologists, Burke appeared oddly detached. He played with toys, smiled inappropriately, and never expressed clear sadness or concern over his sister's death. At one point, he even asked, "What's going to happen to me?" A question some interpreted as revealing an underlying awareness of guilt. Psychological reports and anecdotal accounts also suggested that Burke had a history of behavioral issues. Unconfirmed reports mentioned incidents like smearing feces on walls and toys. Some investigators believed these behaviors pointed to deeper emotional disturbances, which might explain a sudden loss of control that led to JonBenet's death. Moreover, Burke was shielded from law enforcement in the immediate aftermath of the crime. Instead of being interviewed right away, he was sent to a friend's house. Later interviews were conducted with psychologists rather than detectives, and with legal oversight, which critics argue hampered the investigation. Supporters of this theory also point to the elaborate ransom note and staging of the crime scene. They argue that the complexity of the setup, binding JonBenet's wrists, crafting a garrote from a paintbrush and nylon cord, and writing a lengthy ransom note, suggested adult intervention. These actions would be beyond the capability of a 9-year-old, and point instead to parents covering up a tragic accident. Despite these suspicions, there is no physical evidence linking Burke directly to the crime. No DNA, blood, or fingerprints place him at the scene of the actual violence. Additionally, some experts argue that Burke was too small and not physically capable of causing such extensive injuries without assistance. Others question why, if it were truly an accident, the family wouldn't have called for help immediately. Burke has consistently denied any involvement. In 2016, when a documentary was aired and suggested he may have been responsible, he filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit. The matter was later settled, indicating his legal team's determination to protect his reputation. Adding to the complexity, a book titled Foreign Faction by former lead investigator James Kohler proposed a detailed reconstruction based on this theory, suggesting that Burke struck JonBenet in a fit of rage, and the parents staged the rest. Though controversial and challenged by critics, the book remains a significant reference point for proponents of this theory. Finally, Burke's rare public appearance in 2016 reignited public debate. Viewers noted his smiling and disconnected demeanor when discussing his sister's death. While some saw this as evidence of guilt or repression, others argued it reflected the awkwardness and trauma of revisiting a childhood tragedy in front of a national audience. In summary, the theory that Burke Ramsey may have been involved in JonBenet's death is based on circumstantial evidence, psychological interpretations, and inconsistencies in family behavior. It lacks conclusive forensic proof, but continues to attract scrutiny due to unresolved questions and the bizarre nature of the crime. The outsider suspects. From the earliest hours of the investigation, the sheer scale of scrutiny in JonBenet's case was unprecedented. Over the span of nearly 3 decades, hundreds of individuals were interviewed, 400 people were documented in police files. As part of the investigate, 200 individuals were formally interviewed, and dozens were asked to provide handwriting samples, DNA swabs, or polygraph tests. The police chased leads across multiple states, coordinating with the FBI and other local departments. Yet despite the scope, despite the man-hours, the media attention, and the access to federal resources, no single person has ever been charged. It became one of the most exhaustive yet fruitless manhunts in American true crime history. Many people appear with the unbelievable connections to this case. In the early stages of the investigation, public suspicion briefly turned toward William Bill McReynolds, a retired communications professor from the University of Colorado. Known for his iconic appearance, long white beard, soft eyes, and full Santa Claus costume, he had become a beloved figure among local children, including JonBenét Ramsey. On December 23, 1996, just 2 days before JonBenet's murder, McReynolds had been invited to the Ramseys' home to play Santa at their family Christmas party. JonBenet, charmed by him, reportedly gave him a vial of glitter as a gift for luck, asking him to keep it during an upcoming heart surgery. McReynolds did just that, later saying he felt a spiritual connection with the little girl. This detail, along with his personal history and appearance, became a source of unease for investigators and the public. He had once experienced the trauma of his own daughter being kidnapped, which, though she survived, left him deeply affected. To some, this indicated unresolved emotional issues that could manifest in strange ways. Suspicion further escalated due to his wife, Janet McReynolds, who had written a stage play in 1976 about a young girl being raped and murdered in a basement, a chillingly similar setting to JonBenet's fate. Though there was no direct link between the play and the Ramsey case, its eerie similarity cast a shadow over the couple's public image. Despite the speculation, McReynolds voluntarily cooperated with investigators, providing DNA samples and allowing searches of his property. His DNA did not match any of the unknown DNA found on JonBenet's body or clothing. Furthermore, there was no evidence placing him at the Ramsey house after December 23, nor was there anything tying him to the scene beyond his previous visit. Citing the lack of forensic evidence, police officially removed McReynolds from their suspect list. However, the media's portrayal had already done its damage. Media backlash and emotional fallout. McReynolds and his wife were ostracized by their community in Boulder. He publicly stated, "They hurt me permanently. I was never the same again after being called a suspect." Though he maintained his innocence until his death in 2002, the public association with the case haunted him for the rest of his life. He became a vocal critic of the Boulder Police Department, accusing them of incompetence and desperation in targeting innocent individuals. He believed the investigation lacked structure and was driven more by media optics than solid detective work. Among the long list of individuals investigated in connection to JonBenét Ramsey's murder, Gary Howard Oliva stands out for his disturbing background and apparent proximity to the crime. Gary Oliva, born in 1963, is a convicted sex offender with a criminal history that includes multiple charges of child pornography and molestation. His psychiatric records indicate he has struggled with mental illness for years, having undergone treatment at several mental health facilities. He's often described as erratic, unstable, and potentially delusional. At the time of JonBenet's death in December 1996, Oliva was homeless and living around Boulder, Colorado. He was often seen sleeping in churchyards, on benches, and inside university buildings, all within walking distance from the Ramseys' home. Phone records also revealed that he had made calls from a payphone near the Ramsey house around the time of the murder. In 2000, Oliva was arrested for possessing child pornography. Inside his backpack, authorities found a magazine with JonBenét Ramsey's photo, along with explicit images of children. This deeply disturbing discovery raised alarms about a possible obsession. According to Michael Vale, a former friend, Oliva had once called him in tears, admitting he had hurt a little girl. Shortly after JonBenet's murder, he reportedly said it was an accident and that he didn't mean to kill her. Years later, in 2016, Oliva allegedly wrote a letter from prison confessing to the murder, describing it as an accident during a sexual episode. However, no forensic details in the letter matched undisclosed case evidence, leading many, including lead investigator James Kolar, to dismiss the confession as either a delusion or an attempt to gain notoriety. Authorities did conduct a DNA comparison between Oliva and the unidentified samples recovered from JonBenet's clothing and body. His DNA did not match, nor did any other forensic evidence connect him to the basement or crime scene. Because of this, and the lack of physical proof, Oliva has never been charged in connection with the Ramsey case. While the media spotlighted Oliva heavily after his confession, law enforcement never publicly labeled him a prime suspect. Boulder police maintained that his confession lacked credibility, citing his mental instability and tendency to contradict himself under pressure. In the vast web of suspects tied to the JonBenét Ramsey case, none sparked more sensational headlines, yet collapsed more quickly than John Mark Carr. He was born in 1964, an American former elementary school teacher. His professional life unraveled after troubling accusations related to children. Known for erratic behavior and mental instability, Carr had a deep, almost pathological fascination with high-profile child murder cases. Among them, none seemed to occupy his mind more than the death of JonBenét Ramsey. In August 2006, while living in Thailand, Carr sent a chilling email to a university professor interested in the Ramsey case. In it, he claimed responsibility for JonBenet's murder. Thai authorities arrested him, and he was swiftly extradited to the United States. In his confession, Carr claimed, "She died in my arms. It was an accident." He added that he loved JonBenet and never intended to harm her. The media frenzy was immediate, gripping audiences worldwide with the possibility of a long-awaited breakthrough. However, within days of Carr's return to the US, the cracks in his narrative became glaring. He couldn't accurately describe the crime scene. He was unfamiliar with the garrote used in the killing, couldn't name specific details about JonBenet's clothing, and his story lacked coherence. Crucially, Carr's DNA did not match any of the unidentified samples found on JonBenet's clothing or body. Flight records and official documents suggested Carr may not even have been in Colorado at the time of the murder. He was likely in California, hundreds of miles away. The Ramsey family, still haunted by years of suspicion, remained unconvinced by Carr's confession. They believed it only complicated and further sensationalized their daughter's murder. Law enforcement, too, quickly distanced themselves from the confession. The Boulder Police Department and the FBI declared Carr's claims unsubstantiated and lacking physical evidence. Within weeks, John Mark Carr was released without charge. Many psychologists and criminal behavior experts labeled Carr as delusional, possibly suffering from erotomania or identity fantasy. His intense fixation on JonBenet's case, combined with a troubled psyche, may have driven him to falsely insert himself into the narrative. Others speculated he was simply craving attention, or even seeking imprisonment to escape his circumstances abroad. The Ramsey case gave him the global spotlight he seemed to crave. Following his release, Carr legally changed his name to Alexis Raich and publicly came out as transgender. His post-confession years were marked by further erratic behavior and ongoing investigations for other child-related offenses, though he has never been formally charged again in connection to JonBenet. Though never officially charged, Michael Helgoth's profile, behavior, and untimely death have led many independent investigators and journalists to view him as one of the most suspicious figures connected to the case. Michael Helgoth was born in the early 1970s and worked at a local machine repair shop in Boulder, Colorado. He lived in chaotic conditions, often described by friends as mentally unstable, with a fascination for violence. He had a known criminal history, including allegations of child abuse and possession of disturbing materials, although he was never convicted of a sex offense. Reports also suggest he had a pattern of cruelty to animals, killing small creatures for amusement, a behavior often flagged by criminologists as a precursor to more severe violence. Just days before Christmas 1996, Helgoth reportedly told a friend, "Something big is going to happen. Something that will get me $50,000 to $60,000. That comment, made shortly before the $118,000 ransom note appeared in the Ramsey house, struck many as an eerie prelude. While he had no direct tie to the Ramseys, Helgoth lived near their neighborhood and was known to have circulated in social circles not far removed from the family. Some claim he may have visited events related to the Ramseys or been loosely acquainted with people who knew them. When Helgoth died in February 1997, less than 2 months after the murder, investigators found a pair of military boots, gloves, and a stun gun in his home. Some forensic experts had theorized that marks on JonBenet's body could match the prongs of a stun gun, although this remains contested. Most disturbingly, investigators also uncovered photos of children and vague, disturbing notes. Though none of the content was criminal on its own, there were unconfirmed rumors that one note referenced JonBenet by name. Helgoth was confirmed to end himself, a gunshot to the head. However, the circumstances were strange. The gun was found on his left side, though he was right-handed, and there were no powder burns on his hands, a typical residue found in the same close-range firearm shots. Some believe Helgoth may have been silenced by others involved. Private investigators like Ollie Gray and John San Augustine have repeatedly claimed that Helgoth was likely murdered as part of a cover-up. Some theorists believe Helgoth was not acting alone. He allegedly bragged to friends about owning shoes matching prints found at the scene. Additionally, a friend and roommate, known by the nickname Bootman, was also suspected of being involved. Although he was never formally investigated or charged, these suspicions fed a growing theory that a local group of low-level criminals had planned a botched burglary or kidnapping, possibly leading to JonBenet's death, and that Helgoth, either guilty or fearing exposure, was eliminated. Despite the pile of suspicious elements, his DNA did not match samples found on JonBenet's clothing or body, and no direct evidence placed him at the scene. Boulder police remained strangely quiet about his profile, leading some to believe that his potential guilt was quietly dismissed or downplayed. Friends recalled a marked change in Helgoth after the murder, a growing anxiety, paranoia, and distance. He was reported to have said he would never go to jail, in a tone suggesting fatalism. Whether this indicated guilt, fear, or simply mental instability remains unknown. While no court ever charged Michael Helgoth with any crime related to JonBenét Ramsey, the circumstances surrounding his words, behavior, possessions, and death paint a picture too suspicious to ignore. Beyond the immediate family and well-publicized suspects, investigators also cast a wide net toward individuals who had worked in or around the Ramsey home, the people who had reason to be there, who knew the layout, and who might have had quiet access without raising suspicion. Among these were housekeepers, handymen, construction workers, and even former employees of Access Graphics. This group included anyone who might have overheard details about the family's finances, seen how the house functioned, or known of its hidden rooms and security blind spots. Many of them had been inside the house, not just as guests, but as workers with unfiltered access to private areas like the basement, utility spaces, and back entrances. This made them important to investigators early on. After all, the ransom note suggested familiarity with John's Christmas bonus, a detail not likely known to the general public. Could someone from this circle have written the note? Several names briefly surfaced in police files. One plumber, Brian Scott, had worked in the home days before the murder and had a minor criminal record. Another, Glenn Meyer, a tenant in the neighboring house, was known for voicing bitter opinions about the Ramseys. He became a person of interest for a short time. Even a former housekeeper was reviewed after suspicions arose over her access and knowledge of the family's routines. There was also speculation that some workers may have been aware of the small basement room where JonBenet's body was ultimately found, a hidden spot even some officers missed in their initial walkthrough. At least one construction worker reportedly knew of its existence, prompting questions about who else may have been aware of such obscure areas. Some of these individuals had troubling backgrounds. A few had brushes with the law. Others had personal histories of erratic behavior. However, none provided a strong enough lead. Mistakes in the early days of the investigation further weakened this line of inquiry. Some workers were not interviewed until weeks later. By then, several had already left Boulder. Police also failed to thoroughly vet the criminal records or cross-reference schedules and job logs for all possible suspects in this category. The conflicts inside the police department. From the moment JonBenét Ramsey's body was found, the Boulder Police Department assumed control of the investigation. But what followed was a cascade of missteps, internal conflict, and controversial tactics that would haunt the case for decades. Detective Linda Arndt, the first investigator to arrive, was left alone with the Ramsey family during those critical early hours. She couldn't manage the massive mansion or the large number of people flowing in and out. As a result, key evidence was compromised before the investigation had even properly begun. As the case progressed, Boulder PD leaned heavily into the theory that someone inside the home was responsible, either Patsy, John, or Burke Ramsey. But rather than build their case with airtight evidence, the department was later accused of intentionally leaking false and inflammatory information to tabloid outlets, including claims was a pedophile, that the Ramseys were involved in satanic rituals, or even producing child pornography. These unsubstantiated leaks were seen by some as a psychological ploy meant to twist public opinion and pressure the family into confessing. Steve Thomas, a lead detective, eventually resigned in frustration, later publishing a book that argued Patsy Ramsey killed her daughter in a fit of rage, and John helped stage a cover-up. In contrast, James Kohler, chief investigator for the district attorney's office, focused on Burke Ramsey as the unintentional killer, citing forensic inconsistencies and behavioral red flags. His controversial book Foreign Faction drew heavy backlash, but revived public suspicion toward the Ramsey son. Then came Lou Smith, a seasoned homicide investigator brought in by the DA's office in 1997. After meticulously reviewing crime scene photos and physical evidence, Smith publicly broke from Boulder PD's internal theory. He argued the intruder theory held more weight, pointing to unidentified male DNA on JonBenet's underwear, a broken window in the basement, and particularly a pair of marks on JonBenet's face and back spaced precisely 3.5 cm apart, a spacing consistent with the prongs of a stun gun. At least 4 independent forensic pathologists from various jurisdictions agreed that a stun gun may have been used. Smith went so far as to propose exhuming JonBenet's body to confirm the theory. But John Ramsey refused, saying, "That's my daughter, not a body. She's at peace." Smith's insistence on pursuing this path, and Boulder PD's refusal to follow it, created a deep and lasting rift. He resigned and continued his own private investigation until his death, one of the few figures to remain consistently devoted to the intruder theory. Meanwhile, Chief Mark Beckner and DA Alex Hunter walked a tightrope. Despite a grand jury in 1999 voting to indict both John and Patsy for child endangerment resulting in death, Hunter declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence. The decision shocked many within law enforcement and left the public deeply divided. Hunter's successor, Stan Garnett, opted for a cautious approach, avoiding prosecution without definitive evidence and shifting focus toward modern forensic techniques. Over time, other figures entered light. Dr. Henry Lee, a world-renowned forensic scientist, provided expert consultation. Talk show host Dr. Phil McGraw reignited public interest with his 2016 interview with Burke Ramsey, whose odd smiling and demeanor sparked renewed controversy. Throughout it all, the disconnect between Boulder PD and the district attorney's office remained a glaring obstacle. One agency pushed for charges, the other resisted. This internal schism ensured that no unified investigative strategy ever took hold, and instead, the case was tugged in opposing directions by clashing egos and diverging theories. In short, the very institutions meant to deliver justice became entangled in dysfunction. Mistrust, media manipulation, and investigative gridlock reduced the pursuit of truth to a chess game, while JonBenet's murder remained unsolved, her justice left hanging in the balance. The continuous investigation, endless attempt for justice. In 1999, a grand jury secretly voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey for child endangerment and for aiding in the commission of first-degree murder. But then, District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, claiming the evidence was not strong enough to secure a conviction. This decision was not made public until 2013, leading many to question whether the truth had been concealed from the public for years. A turning point came in 2003 when more advanced DNA testing isolated an unknown male DNA profile on JonBenet's underwear and pajamas. This prompted Mary Lisi, in 2008, to issue a formal letter clearing the Ramsey family of involvement, citing the DNA as conclusive. However, critics argued that this DNA could come from contamination during clothing production and was not enough to definitively exonerate the family. That same year, touch DNA was found on both JonBenet's underwear and the waistband of her long johns. This added weight to the theory that someone outside the family had direct contact with her body. In the years that followed, true crime podcasts, documentaries, and articles continued to keep the case alive. However, there were no significant updates from law enforcement. In 2021, police confirmed they were working with forensic labs to reanalyze remaining DNA using modern technology like genetic genealogy, which had recently solved other cold cases such as the Golden State Killer. Still, no meaningful breakthroughs were announced. By 2023, frustration among the public reached a boiling point. More than 20,000 people signed a petition demanding the case be reassigned to the FBI or a federal cold case team. In response, the Colorado Cold Case Review Team was assembled, a multi-agency task force including the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the Boulder DA's office, and both public and private forensic labs. This marked a shift toward a full reassessment of all physical and testimonial evidence. The scope of this re-examination was unprecedented. Investigators fully digitized the case archive, creating a centralized database that included over 1 million pages of reports, more than 20,000 tips, and 1,000 interviews spanning 17 states and 2 countries. Evidence was collected and preserved from over 200 individuals, including handwriting samples, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe impressions. The archive also included 500 physical pieces of evidence, from fibers to ligatures, carefully indexed and scanned into a digital case file. This effort transformed the investigation into a searchable, accessible repository for forensic experts. In addition to traditional methods, experts began exploring cutting-edge technologies such as MVAC DNA collection systems. The MVAC allows for collection of trace biological material from porous surfaces and clothing, places where conventional swabs might fail. This device has been crucial in resolving other long, cold cases by extracting otherwise invisible DNA. Though Boulder PD has not publicly confirmed MVAC deployment in the Ramsey case, Multiple experts and advocacy groups have urged its use, citing its potential to recover trace material from JonBenet's clothing or bindings. Despite the scale of these efforts, Boulder authorities continued to face criticism for limiting access to external laboratories and maintaining tight control over remaining biological evidence. Many forensic specialists believe that full cooperation with outside entities and use of MVAC or advanced STR analysis could reveal a match to the unknown male DNA, still considered the most vital clue. Today, the case remains open but unresolved. John and Patsy Ramsey have both been cleared by the DA, though Patsy passed away in 2006. Burke continues to live privately, appearing only rarely in public. John remains an advocate for justice, pushing for increased transparency and external review. Meanwhile, the fate of the investigation now depends not just on science, but on institutional will, whether those holding the keys are ready to let new tools finally speak for JonBenet. What the JonBenét Ramsey case ultimately leaves behind is not just a haunting mystery, but a devastating lesson about how fragmented perspectives can fracture justice. From the very beginning, investigators were split. One group believed it had to be the parents. Another swore it was an intruder. Experts argued over fiber evidence, over handwriting, over DNA. And instead of forming a united front to pursue truth, the investigation splintered into camps, each defending its own theory, each too proud or too cautious to fully collaborate. The Boulder police clung to their in-house theory. The district attorney's office contradicted it. Private investigators introduced new suspects. The media fed every narrative until the waters were too murky to see clearly. And somewhere in all of that noise, a JonBenet was forgotten. When egos lead and institutions refuse to share, time becomes the enemy. Critical evidence was lost, trust was broken, opportunities were missed, and justice, real, unshakable justice, drifted further away. So we have to ask, what does it say about us when a 6-year-old's murder becomes less about truth and more about which theory wins? JonBenét Ramsey deserves more than theories. She deserves the truth. And in the end, it all comes down to this: there is only one truth. But the ways people look at it are countless. Will we ever stop looking from our own corners and finally stand in the same light to see it together?